So I wanted to go over how to enter your linear regression model into the graph and also to use the function itself to make predictions in an easier way than having to do everything by hand. So this is a recent activity. We've got in the L1, we've got horsepower for a bunch of different cars and the corresponding miles per gallon, the mileage in the L2 column. And we're saying that horsepower is going to predict the miles per gallon. When you do the scatter plot for this data, you can see that there is a somewhat strong to moderate negative linear association between these two variables, horsepower and gas mileage. And that's something hopefully we should have been able to do prior to this point. The new thing is to actually come up with the model and the graph that goes along with it. So I'm going to show you how to do that next. So we're going to go into the stat menu again and over to calc, where in the previous section we found one var stat. Now the model you're actually going to use is not number 4 here. This is okay, you can get away with using it. But in statistics we tend to use this other arrangement a plus bx, and the reason for that is sometimes this is pretty much beyond the scope of this class, but they will have multiple x variables that go along with a prediction, so they tend to put the constant or the y-intercept first. Okay, so they use option 8 here, so a is your y-intercept and b is your slope. Okay, so let's use that. Make sure that your lists are the way that they were that when you typed in the data. So your X list, horsepower, is in L1. Your Y list, your miles per gallon, is in L2. We don't really use this frequency list at this point. This is only used if you have multiple inputs for certain values. So we don't really use that too often in this class. If we do, I'll show you how to work with that specifically. But what I want to do on these newer calculators, the TI-84 pluses, you want to store this equation in Y1 in the Y equals menu. And the way to do that is to hit vars, then go over to Y vars, then functions, and then select Y1. Okay, so that will store the equation in your Y equals menu in the calculator. Okay. If you have a TI-83, what you're going to do is hit those same buttons. You're going to hit what would be calculate here, and then when the model shows up, you're going to hit a comma and then go through those same procedures, and this Y1 will show at the end of the function, and then just hit enter. So if on these newer calculators, you have to go down and hit calculate, and then it shows up this way. Okay, so a little difference between the TI-83s and the 84s, but hopefully you end up at the same spot here. Okay, so you have your y-intercept, which is 38.5, your slope, which is negative 0.92, and your correlation, which is negative 0.878, something like that. Okay. If you didn't do that last step with the Y1, if you go in and hit graph, your equation will not show up on the graph. But by doing that last step with the Y1, now when I hit graph, my line shows up in addition to the scatter plot. And if you do hit Y1, or Y equals, you'll see it's stored now in Y1. Okay, make sure going forward, if you do a different problem, you hit clear and get rid of that, but we want that for now, so we'll keep it in there. Okay, so we can see how the line fits and how some of the data is above the line, some of it's below, and a lot of it's very close. So that indicates it's a strong relationship. Okay, so that's a helpful tool. The other thing that's nice about that setup, in the actual work that you did, I asked you about predicting for 250 horsepower and then 500 horsepower. Now, most of you calculated that by hand and plugged it into the formula. But the other nice thing about that y equals function is if I use that again, if I do vars, y vars, functions, and y1, if I put the number that I want to input into the formula afterwards, so in the problem we did it was 250, you put it in parentheses and you put it afterwards and just hit enter, it will give you the output for the equation, kind of like function notation. that we stored in Y1. So that's a helpful tool, and you can actually use that in pre-calculus and algebra 2 as well, in calculus. So use that to your advantage. Whatever's stored in Y1 in your Y equals menu, if you do that setup, it will give you the output exactly for the input 250 or whatever you're doing. And if you don't want to go through that process again and you're doing multiple questions in the same form, you can hit second and then the entry button, or second enter, and it'll give you the previous entry that you put in one more time. And there was another question that we did where you plugged in 500. So that just saves you from hitting a few buttons, and you can get the output for that as well. So you can use the calculator to your advantage. I know there's some other software on the computer and websites in the computer that are a little easier, but again, as of now, this is the only thing that we're going to be able to use on the AP exam, so knowing these different functions will be very helpful for you. Okay, so thanks for watching. Make sure you take some notes of these because obviously they're not easy to remember all those different steps.